But for the first session, I would like to invite Martin Jagger, General Manager at We Connect Energy, who will be our moderator for the first session on CCS in Oman. So Martin, the floor is yours. Please invite your speakers, introduce your panel, and you take it from there. Thank you, Martin.
Welcome my panel members up so that they can introduce themselves, I think. So Dr. Firas, first, please.
Good morning, everyone. Warm welcome to you over here. It's an exciting topic. Firas Al-Abdouani, Director General at the Ministry of Energy and Minerals, looking at renewable energy and green hydrogen, or hydrogen, but CCS is also part of the mandate we look into. Pleasure meeting you.
And Mohammed, thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, everybody. Mohammed Shuaili from Petroleum Development Oman, shortly said PDO. I work as a Climate Change and Sustainability Manager, providing support across a wide range of topics, and one of them is policy and regulatory support for carbon capture and storage. Thank you.
Bernadine, could you come up and introduce yourself, please?
Hi, my name is Bernadine Smith. I'm the Principal for Policy, Regulation and Commercial at the Global CCS Institute. Thank you.
And last but not least, Ali, if you could join us.
Good morning, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. So I'm Ali Mohammadi from OQ Gas Network, heading the Network and Business Development Department, responsible for growing the business into transportation of CO2 and hydrogen. Very excited to be here and contributing to a fruitful discussion on how we can deploy CCS across Oman, hopefully.
And just introduce myself. My name's Martin Jagger. I first worked in PDO in the mid-1990s, left about 27 years ago. My background is 37 years in Shell, 3 years as an independent consultant. In Shell, I set up their Global Carbon Capture Centre of Excellence in 2007. One of the things we looked at in that is the communication around CCS. Let me start off first with Dr. Firas. I understand that the Ministry of Energy and Minerals has signed a memorandum of understanding of cooperation, all in the field of carbon capture and storage, with a number of different parties. What can you share about the progress that is being made in this and the outcomes that you're looking forward to? And how do you envisage a staircase of projects that take us forward from trailblazer to commercial?
I'll give it a shot, and hopefully the echo doesn't deafen us all. So thank you for the question. What I'd like to do is maybe to explain the memorandum we signed before getting into the objectives that we hope to achieve. So CCUS for us is one of the levers, as Dr. Mohammed presented. Without having all of the levers available to us, it's really impossible for Oman and any nation to address the decarbonization. Oman is a oil and gas rich country. It has the expertise, it has the geology, it has the manpower to actually utilize CCUS as one of its levers. It makes sense for us to consider that. We also look at our industry, and we're talking about blue hydrogen, low carbon hydrogen as a potential bridging fuel, particularly until green hydrogen, renewable hydrogen kicks in, or white hydrogen. So again, there's another economic incentive why we want blue hydrogen or blue products to be considered. So when we looked at all of these, we said, okay, we want to embark on enabling and studying, and we had a high-level policy assessment, 2 of them, in fact. One of them was the net zero assessment that was primarily run by the Environmental Authority in coordination with the Ministry of Energy. And then we had another study, which was the Oman Energy Transition Policy, and again in coordination with multiple stakeholders, including Environmental Authority, among others. Both of them, when it came to CCUS, were actually quite consistent. So we looked at Oman and we said, okay, we expect by 2030, 5% to 6% of the hard-to-abate sectors need to be abated by CCS. And when we move to 2040, we expect that to reach around 50, 54%. So it's an instrument that is essential in all of the modeling we did, but we require to have a regulatory framework. We wanted to have the stability for the industry to come in and have bankable projects. Importantly, we need to have social buy-in from the public itself, that we cannot move with these projects. So what we did is said, okay, let's start and analyze who's there and how can we move forward. Now, from a business perspective, we have the trailblazers. So there were already parties who said, we want to do it. Oxy, for example, has been doing CO2 EOR in the US since the 1970s. It's something that we would benefit from in Oman by moving away from, for example, water injection or polymer injection, which is quite actually emissions intensive. So that was one of the objectives, to enable CO2 flooding in Oman, whether it makes sense. And we said, okay, who wants to do it? In fact, they came to us. So Oxy and PDO both said, we want to do EOR projects. And when we ran the economics, and I know there are other topics that we'll discuss about CO2 and to give the mic to others, EOR itself could finance a lot of the infrastructure required. So we said this actually for us is important to have as a trailblazer, because this could open the door for the more difficult CCS projects to follow. And then we had other companies who came in, but the first who came in with the concept of doing a blue hydrogen was actually Shell. That they came in partnership with PDO, and they said, we want to look at an opportunity to run a feasibility and to assess whether the government would be interested. We have the blocks between us, Shell, and PDO, the concessions. We have also potentially have gas availability. Can we look into it as a government? Would you allow us to study? And we said, yes, this is of interest. Let's proceed. And then, of course, the pioneers we have among us, 4401, who have direct air capture. And they won the Breakthrough Award in the UK. And as the host nation, of course, we would want to support them because Ophiolites are available here. So this is why we created the CCUS framework. We cut it into work streams to enable different parties to work and synthesize it all into a cohesive one. And it includes different government entities, includes industry, and it includes academia. The next stage is then to engage with the general public as appropriate when we strategize it.
Oh, thank you very much for that. I must admit, I've got personal interest in 4401. I advised them, and I started my PhD on peridotite, so it works very, very well. Mohammed, what role is CCS expected to play in PDO's plan for decarbonisation, and particularly over what time frame are you looking at?
Thanks, Martin, for this question. So a bit perhaps of introduction about PDO in case maybe we do have some regional or international visitors. So PDO is the main hydrocarbon producer here within Oman, and we've been operating in one of the largest blocks. We call it Block 6 basically, producing oil and gas throughout the year since 1960. So just a step back, when we started really looking at decarbonization and emission reduction within PDO, we started really by mapping out all the sources. There are some conventional sources within a typical oil and gas, be it the power generation, be it the flaring itself, be it, for example, the methane emissions, and so on and so forth. And as a result of this mapping exercise, we've also looked into what could be the possible solutions. We've listed a number of solutions. Some of them are conventional solutions, basically. Just maybe a bit of background. So PDO, they generate their own electricity or power. So we do run our own power systems that consist of around 29 gas turbines. So a large chunk of our emissions basically is generated from power generations. More than 60% of the emissions are generated from power generations. So out of this mapping exercise, what are the likely and most cost-effective solutions? Of course, we've listed a number of renewables, basically solar, wind, energy efficiency, flare reduction, and so on, or gas conservation projects, and so on and so forth. But then we've realized that there is some chunk, basically, or a percentage of emissions that cannot be reduced by the conventional and the typical solutions. And what could be the other options that basically I would call it cost effective and already proven and tested. So clearly carbon capture, utilization and storage was one of the obvious option in this case. And we looked basically into two, I will call it parallel streams. The first one is maximize utilization of CO2 for whatever beneficial use. So one of the typical or conventional use is enhanced oil recovery or enhanced gas recovery. And this is also linked to that large chunk of PDO production comes from enhanced oil recovery. The other work stream or parallel stream basically is the storage. And this is a storage, be it for our own emissions or even as a service for the other industrial activities or new energies within Oman. So in short, I would call it really it stands and to provide a significant percentage of emission reduction within PDO total emissions, and the timeline, I think this is also important. So the focus really is around, I would call it, executing the quick wins and the cost-effective solutions as we move. But 2030 onwards, definitely at that time, we will start really resorting to the carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Especially, PDO has a commitment towards net zero by 2050, in line with the government announced commitments.
Earlier this morning, we had a working group session in which Bernardine introduced the Phase 1 report on regulatory structures to PDO, to the government. Bernardine, based on that work that you and your colleagues in GCCSI have been doing on potential regulatory frameworks for Oman, what aspects of regulation and policy do you think would most accelerate CCS adoption in Oman by 2030? And does that need to develop further as we move from trailblazer to commercial by 2050?
Thank you for that, Martin. So yes, I made a few notes here from this morning. I believe that the deployment of CCS will be accelerated when there is policy and regulatory certainty. We've seen that around the world. And from the comments made in the session this morning, for those who were not there, the Institute developed 7 options for the development of a policy and legal and regulatory framework for CCS in Oman. And all of those options will really have to be tested in terms of ease of implementation, time frame of implementation, social acceptance, stakeholder acceptance, etc. But I think the key to that is, if we want to have certainty as soon as possible, those regulations must be flexible enough to accommodate stakeholders and to create that certainty for investors. And it must not be more stringent, as Tim Dixon said, more stringent than what we already see in terms of approaches in other international jurisdictions. And the basis for that is really that CCS is becoming more certain as a technology. We are understanding the movement of the plume better, we are understanding liability during operations, we are understanding liability post-closure better, and as we gain more certainty, there is room for regulations to be less stringent than what we saw 10 or 15 years ago. I also see the EU realizing that flexibility would be key. If we look at the Net Zero Industry Act that's currently under consideration, it makes provision for the regulatory sandbox that we discussed this morning, where EU member states will have the flexibility to enact regulations really in a regulatory sandbox environment, where they have the opportunity to make regulations less stringent, to have net zero technologies enacted and regulated quicker in order to meet their net zero commitments. And I think that will be key for Oman as well. Be flexible, not too stringent, and to consider the perspectives of all the stakeholders in basically a regulatory sandbox environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ali, let's try to wrap up now in terms of what are each of you doing. OQGN's already been approached by leading industry partners to support your CCS commitments. What details can you provide about the progress that you're making on CCS, and do you recognise any blockers to your ambitions in this area?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. So at OQGN, we've been working on CCS for the past almost 2 years, and it's part of our aspirations of growth for an organization that is the currently exclusive owner and operator of the natural gas network in Oman, spanning all the way from the north to the south, over 4,000 kilometers of pipelines. So it becomes a natural growth element that we see it in our business. And it helps that we have existing relationships with a lot of the industrial players who are involved in this field, whether it's the NOCs that are operating the blocks and producing the gas, who will be requiring to capture CO2, or they have the assets of the storage areas and the expertise in the subsurface, as well as the industrial players, especially in the industrial clusters in the coast, who also use gas that is transferred to them by OQGN, and have a strong push, whether internally by their shareholders or through the government's incentivization that will come with the regulations in terms of reducing their net zero, reducing their carbon emissions. So what we see is that we are a natural fit in connecting these two. And that's where we could play a critical role in enabling this decarbonization activity to happen, supported by the regulation with the ministry and obviously the various partners we're dealing with. So that's just, it comes as a natural fit. And then there is specific advantages that we have at OQGN that we believe will allow us to be a key factor in allowing this low carbon products, especially when we look at the blue ammonia production to become cost competitive. So our network and right-of-ways of our natural gas pipelines, we're looking at using these co-locating potentially CO2 pipelines. We already have the expertise in planning, designing, master planning the networks, executing them and operating them. So we're looking at using the same organization structure in a way and transforming it to allow us to operate CO2 lines. And it happens similar that as we're working on the same field with the green hydrogen developments in Oman, we could potentially see corridors where all three lines go together. So based on all of these activities, we've been engaged with a number of stakeholders. We've signed a number of memoranda of understandings. We're very proud to be working closely with the government and the ministry to be part of the CCS and the Blue Hydrogen Regulatory and Policy core team. And we're very excited to be part of this journey.
Dr. Firas, that brings me back to you. When I've been involved over the years with CCS projects, there's been a lot of discussion. I remember sitting in a meeting with the Shell CEO and the Australian Energy Minister, having a discussion about subsidising a potential project there. In this case, it was CCS on an FLNG platform, and the answer was no. So it didn't happen. How does Oman plan to incentivise the deployment of CCS? To me, I see a role for subsidy in startup, but I don't think you can scale subsidy to deliver 7.6 gigatons by 2050, which is what we'll need. That has to be a commercial solution. So have you considered financial incentives, carbon pricing, carbon border tax? And how do you see that transition from trailblazer to commercial developing for Oman?
It's a difficult question, to be honest, Dr. Martin, and it's difficult because it entangles multiple elements. That involves carbon pricing, as you mentioned, impact on the economy, and other elements that we really need to consider. So the way we're looking at it is we're having a holistic view on how CCS could deliver what we want and what are the economics that work around it. So some of the things that we're considering, first of all, is the evolution. So I'll come back to the framework itself, and what we did is that we created it with a core team and 6 work streams, and then we added the 7th, particularly because of this point. So we had the capture, we had the transportation, the utilization, focusing first on oil and gas. We had the storage, blue products, international relations, because with Saudi Arabia and the regional countries such as Emirates, we also have potential collaboration on networks. And then we had to add a 7th one to link with our colleague, Khaled Ghamari, who just left from the Oman Sustainability Center, who are going to be in charge of the carbon policy of Oman at some point, or rather the market structure. That's really called the carbon market structure. So for us to address what incentives we want to do, we need to understand how the market structure is going to be. We all believe that carbon is an externality that has to have a price on it. You cannot keep on polluting without being penalized for it. There are some things that as a world we need to take a view on. So historic emissions, the difference between developed nations and developing nations, all of these need to be accounted for. But when we come, and these need to be addressed, because any decisions we make could hamper us economically, and that also needs to be done in a fair manner globally. So when we come to Oman, we identified some of the carbon-related projects that we believe are self-paying for themselves. So we have a feeling, and the numbers we're waiting to see from the oil and gas companies, but we believe that there are some projects that do not require any incentive. Now, they're not really CCS projects. EUR is not a CCS project. You're taking it and you're using it, and at some point the carbon will break through and it gets released, and you have to capture it and then circle it back. So from a global perspective, it's not really a storage, but it is an oil-enhancing technology that will be able to build the pipelines and bear that cost. So this is first and foremost. If we can start building nuclei of pipelines and infrastructure, then the amount of subsidy that we need to bring in for other projects becomes less, because we have a self-sustaining, economically viable model. In fact, something that we potentially could tax and use to subsidize. One of the things that the world uses is CFDs, so using contracts for difference. If you know what the carbon price will be, and this is what the rest of the world is doing, and you project it, and the UK has a great example of how they do that, then the government can say, okay, it's not really that we're subsidizing, we're just shifting the time period when we put money and get it back. And that also works. So these are the levers we're looking at, but they're still in the early stages. What we really need to do is to mature the studies we have. And I believe by the Q4 period, we will have greater clarity, and by that time we'll have a recommendation to take to the leadership and the government to make a decision on what tools we want to start utilizing to incentivize the CCS.
I think there's one thing I'd encourage you to look at, because a lot of people tend to look at you and say, what's your view on carbon pricing for Oman? But the reality is it's the carbon pricing in the markets in which you will place your products and Oman's products, your steel products, your LNG, your oil. What happens when they introduce a $50 carbon price, a $100 carbon price? So a lot of it is about preparation for that. Yeah. Question really to all of you, but I'm going to start with Mohammed because I know it's a topic that was particularly interesting him. CCS project proponents in some countries have faced opposition from specifically local community. And we're increasingly seeing in a social media world that opposition has no boundaries. You're getting projects have the potential to be attacked by people, some informed, some less informed. So how should Oman, those operating CCS in projects, approach the public perception of CCS and ensure a license to operate? My point has always been we end up talking about the risk of doing CCS, but nobody recognizes the risk of not doing, which of course is venting to atmosphere and all of the implications of that.
Thanks for starting, let's say, picking me to start with this challenging question. And I know it's not only globally there is a hot debate around it, also locally and regionally there is also a hot debate around this topic. But I think the starting point for us here within Oman is really to recognize and understand that these are genuine concerns, these are valid concerns, basically, which stems from, could be from a number of drivers, be it could be it's a new technology, be it's a new area, there are a number of associated risks linked with this technology, and so on and so forth. So the starting point is to recognize these concerns and then moving forward really and picking a lot of learnings and understandings from the hydrocarbon business, which again, if we let's say reflect back around 60s, 70s when we started the operations, and even beyond the 70s, there were also a lot of concerns, similar concerns basically, be it in terms of the contamination of aquifers, be it in terms of the releases to the atmosphere, be it in terms of damage, let's say, to the protected areas or to the grazing lands, also around, impact nearby settlements and so on and so forth. So at that time also there were so many concerns, but I think the proper planning and engagement with the different stakeholders, especially the local ones, paid back and proved that the moment you start a constructive dialogue, and I would really emphasize on a dialogue, it's not a one-way somehow communication. No, that it starts by us listening to these concerns and explaining and addressing all of these concerns. So if we look at it clearly, there are similar risks associated with the carbon capture. Contamination to aquifers, basically, is one of the obvious risks. There are also potential releases to the atmosphere. There are also some land damage associated with the transportation pipelines and so on and so forth. And I think it's key really to understand this, sit and have a dialogue, open dialogue with the various stakeholders to help support each other in addressing all of these concerns. Maybe I'm glad that you've worked in PDO, but most of these concerns starts with the exploration activities. When you want to start in a green field, basically, and imagine that saying to the local people that I want to drill for a sour well, and there is a potential of sour gas leak, which if we compare it with a carbon injection activity, it's way. The impact here is with the carbon is way much less than indeed. But I think the proper understanding and proper addressing all of these risks. So these are risks. These are the potential controls and mitigation measures with the support, of course, with the regulatory bodies and so on. Thanks.
Yeah, certainly. You mentioned two things there. One was leakage to atmosphere. Well, that's what everyone's doing every day of the week, 100%. Yeah. So a small percentage risk from a storage project is an inconsequential risk by comparison. And you also said manage potable water aquifers. You do that every day. That's been your business for decades. So, Dr. Firas, you want to add to that?
Yes. What I wanted to add is an element you mentioned in your question, which is what is the risk if we don't do CCS? And this is an element that we really need to work on with the general public. So, it's very recent. And also, before I touch that point, I'd like to say that the arguments we're getting or the concerns we're getting from the general public fall into two brackets from my mind. Some of them are cognitive, intellectual ones, and some of them are emotional. And we need to be able to grasp that and work with them and with ourselves with that mindset, recognizing things that are fact-based and things that are emotional. And both of them need to be addressed. We cannot... Sometimes you believe in something, factually, but your heart is not in it. So we need to be able to address both elements. And if you look at the recent incidents, for example, the floods that happened in Dubai, in one day you had the rain equivalent to a whole year. It also impacted Oman. We had some, unfortunately and very painfully, some lives lost over here. Now, if these are truly linked to climate change, and if this is shown factually, and the emotions are certainly there for the losses that we incurred, both monetary and unfortunately even life-wise, then these are elements that we have a dialogue about. I think we also have a responsibility to start promoting these fact-based information in a manner that is digestible. So we need to start top level, why do we need to decarbonize at a high level? Human survivability is the essence of it. And then what are the levers that the globe has? What are the levers Oman has? Does CCS really play a significant role and an important role, a non-replaceable role? What are the economic? So all of these items are things that we in the core team have said, in fact, it's part of our mandate. It's in our terms of reference that we need to engage. It's just that we're at the early stage, and now we're starting to kickstart it. We're saying, no, we need to engage with the community and with the academia because they are quite well respected. And surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, not all of them see it the way we see it. So we need to start there, and we've already started with these dialogues, and we'll take it forward, inshallah.
So education and dialogue.
Absolutely.
Bernardine, for many, 2050 still seems a long way off. I'll be 95, so it's an extremely long way off if I make it till then. Transitioning is expensive. Some it's uncertain. The regulatory environment can influence market forces. So how do we get the regulatory and policy balance right to support an orderly transition and accelerate deployment? It's a tough question.
Yes, it is a tough question. So what I'm going to do is refer to examples of what not to do and what to do, and then leave the choice to Oman. We need to find we need to find a balance between policy decisions and regulatory decisions, or the development of regulations. What we don't want to do is what we see in the US at the moment, where there was a great policy decision, 45Q, made a lot of tax credits available and people are jumping for it. And now we have so many applications that the regulators cannot deal with a pipeline of applications. So we want to avoid that pitfall in Oman. We need to have a balanced approach between policy decisions, policy incentives, and then the regulatory mechanism and the permitting systems to be able to deal with what is coming through the pipeline. A good example is the EU, where we have seen the industrial carbon management strategy being announced on the same day as the net zero target by 2040, which linked that directly and said to the developers and the community and the EU member states at large, we are going to help you. We have set the target, but we are going to help you. And they have targeted funding programs, for example, the Innovation Fund for Commercial Projects, the Horizon Europe Fund for Research and Innovation Projects, and then Connecting Europe facility for the transport networks between capture and storage. So they made available funding to help the developers do what they need to do, but they have also put in place flexible regulatory mechanisms to deal with a pipeline of projects coming. The other example is Australia, where we have the safeguard mechanism, which is not the carrot, but it's the stick version of your emissions reduction, where the baselines will reduce by 4.9% every year, and that all high emitters need to comply with those policy decisions. But there's a funding program being made available at the same time for decarbonisation technologies, and that could include CCS. So there needs to be a balance between what is decided, or the incentives, whether it be carrot or stick, and the regulatory mechanisms must be able to deal with what's coming through the pipeline then. So yes, 2050 is a long way off, but if we get the regulations and the policy incentives backing those regulations right, then there should be an orderly transition through 2030 to 2050.
Thank you very much. Ali, it wouldn't be right to have a panel session with engineers if we don't talk about metals and kit and infrastructure. Yeah, one of the most fun days I had managing Carbon Capture Storage Centre of Excellence was spent at the Spade Adams site in Northumberland in 2010, funding a joint industry project on CO2 pipelines. And we'd got a piece of pipeline and we'd put a 1/4 of an inch hole into it, filled it with supercritical CO2, and then opened the hole. And every sensor failed instantaneously. So we learnt a lot about CO2 sensors, we learnt a lot about embrittlement. CO2 pipelines require very specific standards and metallurgical specifications, not just because of the corrosive impact of CO2, but often because of the co-contaminants that come from different capture sources. What can you share about Oman's plans for agreeing those specifications and the sourcing of appropriate pipeline materials to ensure safe transportation of CO2?
Thanks, Dr. Martin. I think it's a very valid concern that we're sharing together with our partners, and something we're tackling with. I think, first of all, this is going to be a bit of an exercise between balancing how you can deploy a cost-effective network, especially when you come for the early commercial scale deployments of projects, while making it flexible enough to allow uptake of future entrants into this market. The smaller industrial players who want to capture, and maybe you don't want to make it too restrictive. So how this works, and I think this is where it could be something that is done in a very right way. We're discussing it as part of the of the work under the blessing of the ministry with the core group in terms of how do all the partners agree on what's a suitable specification here. And this is something we're doing in continuous dialogue with our partners, whether it's for the Trailblazer projects or how we identify the other industrial players who want to come into the market. So, for example, in terms of the specifications, we're starting with what we know from other developments that have happened across the world. So North America have been using C2 transportation for EOR for a while. There's some developments happening in Europe, with offshore pipelines for CO2. While looking at it and how we can deploy it with the specifications that's still cost effective for the pipeline, because we don't want it to make it prohibitive for future entrants who might not have the scale available. So that's a dialogue that is happening with us. Now, to add to that aspect, we're also part of a joint industrial project that is happening across, I think it's part of the DNV GIPs. Our team is working with that to address other aspects of what we need to consider for deployments of CO2. So beside the procurement aspect, an important part that will happen is the metering of CO2, especially if you have, I think that will be a unique proposition in Oman where the requirements, at least initial for CO2, might not be just for storage, which is what Europe is looking at, but it's a utilization. So we have some partners, and obviously EOR is going to be still a big factor to play with CO2 EOR. So if a network is taking CO2 molecules for both of these purposes, and there's a very strict requirements in terms of the end destination of the CO2s, of these molecules, then metering becomes very important because you need to ensure your verification and your certification of this, of the blue products that are produced are traceable and you can verify it. Finally, in terms of the procurement and the material selection, at the early stages we're in, we're comfortable that the current procurement and the suppliers will be able to meet the requirements that we have for Oman. It's just that can we address it in a way to reduce or mitigate the risk that is there with CO2? So the risk of CO2 is well known there. The possible very high pressures that you need to transport it, it's lower than air, so any leakage will have a significant impact. We are working very closely with one of the pioneers with Shell for the Blue Horizon project, which they've done a bit of work on that, and we're confident that this could be deployed in Oman for the 2030 target.
Okay, thank you. The producers today can produce carbon-intensive steel that meet your standards. Should we be using carbon-intensive steel to build the energy infrastructure, and does it create a circular carbon opportunity for steel producers in Oman? I'll leave that one there. DMV was the project I was involved in. I would certainly encourage you to, anyone to involve them. It's a great opportunity for people to learn and also to buy their existing recommended practices on storage and on pipeline transportation. I think there's huge value in there.
We are part of these, so
it's good. Yeah, Dr. Firas, this morning in the working group, there was a couple of times when the conversation turned to liability transfer. Strong recommendation by one of the experts in there that the EU regulation made mistakes in how it set that up. I pressed the point that it has to be criteria-based and not just a moment in time, say 5 years after the end of injection, and that it has to be agreed before a project starts. Has the ministry had any thinking or guidance on liability transfer yet? Because to me it lies at the heart of determining commerciality. We can't leave open-ended liability and an open-ended financial cost on the table.
It is indeed one of the pressing points, and in fact, out of the different questions you asked today, I would say this is the one where, for us, it remains less obvious, to be honest. So there are different ways, and as we have these different workshops, including today's, we get further insights into what has been done, what has worked, and what hasn't worked so far. And we leverage the learnings we get from the parties that have preceded us and worked ahead. And this is one of the benefits of being a second mover rather than a first mover. So from our perspective, we're just going to wait for the phase 2 that's going to come in from the study that we're continuing. This is one of the areas we're going to address. So we're looking at the gaps, first of all, in the regulations we have. And then when we come to maturing the business model, this is something that we're also developing. And what we're doing is that we're developing it collectively between us as a government, the industry, and the academia to come up with an answer. From my perspective, I fully agree with what you say. It cannot be just a time slot transfer. It needs to have conditions associated with it. Now, what these are, what the time is also a debate. We've seen in the US that when one of the particular states had a much lenient liability transfer, there was a flood of projects coming into it. But then it becomes more of a greenwashing kind of perspective, and then there's less credibility from the global markets because they don't believe in the capability, or the state itself, another division of it pushes back and says, we will not adhere to that. So we need to be careful, and it needs to be a comprehensive solution. And it brings us back also to acting fast and being deliberate in what decisions we make, to also give solid answers. What I would say is that we're committed by the end of this year, we would have answers to this particular question, inshallah.
Thank you. You touched nicely there on US and US regulation. Mohammed, I want to talk slightly about Class 6 injection wells or injection well standards for Oman. During my time working in PDO, working on a number of complex Kuf sour gas wells in Yibal and the surrounding areas, well design was very highly controlled. The water, the management of making sure we protected the aquifers was very well done. My gut feel is that you are close to having in place as a company and as a country the kind of design standards that would work. Now, going to Class 6 injection wells isn't just about the well design, it's actually about the whole regulatory process around it, and I think there are clearly things to learn from there. Do you think Oman already has in place the regulations and standards that offer sufficient protection to potable water aquifers? I mean, PDO have done this for a long, long time.
Thanks for really raising this. And the short answer is yes. So now I need to explain why. Basically, so if we look at water, basically, it's a more precious commodity here in Oman, and probably maybe many different parts within the world. Since we are a scarce, call it water scarce nation, and it's really a key challenge for Oman forward. Lucky enough that we are getting lots of our drinking water from desalination activities throughout the country. But even though this doesn't mean that it's an open check to contaminate the aquifers and groundwater. And right from the beginning, I think the government and people here, they realize the importance of water to the whole nation. And if we look into the heritage of Oman and so on, we will see that lots of water and irrigation system is designed around water. Basically the water protection in one hand, but also the let's say I would call it the endemic, if I may use this word, the endemic village system, basically, which is driven around protecting the water and supplying it for various uses. So going back to these requirements, I think it's key that all the industrial activities here within Oman, they comply with the existing water regulations, which are well established in line with the international requirements. There is lots of learning, of course, nobody can deny this. There is lots of learnings around international system. But if we look back again here in Oman, we realize that environmental protection and groundwater protection is one of the yearly laws within the country, and this is a clear recognition of the importance of the environmental resources within within the country itself. So there is lots of learning, but it doesn't mean that we can freely, let's say, or openly import and use the Class 6 permitting system. There is a well-established system, and there are well-established water management practices, be it, let's say, at the design stage, at the injection stage, all the way to site closeout stage. We have learned and gained a lot by practicing this, and beside all of this, there is also a well-established risk management, groundwater monitoring system. PDO and other industrial players, they are using it, and it's openly and independently reviewed by the government entities and the international ISO standards, basically.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you. It's interesting, the conversation tends to be forward-looking about the design standard of injection. And it frustrates me and amuses me in equal proportions in the United States to see the attention they play on a Category 6 well, and yet they have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of abandoned, orphaned wells, all of which are leakage points, potential leakage points to surface for methane and CO2. So again, within the regulation, I would encourage you to look at the abandonment standards of legacy wells, particularly when you're looking at voided pore space, EOR kind of projects, to make sure that they are secure for containment. Bernardine, yeah, Oman's national strategy for the energy transition to net zero looks to put CCS right at the heart of it in making a significant reduction. I think around 15%, is that correct? Okay, yeah, 5 to 6%. What recent development give you optimism that Oman could be excited about CCS opportunities?
Thank you, Martin. Yeah, there are a few things that make me excited about Oman. First of all, that Oman is a forerunner in the announcement of the net zero target by 2050, together with the UAE. As I said this morning, it's better than many of the other countries in the region. So that shows commitment. It also has in the 2040 net zero vision CCS specifically as a pillar, which is great. It just shows commitment from the government to incorporate that into the net zero technologies to meet the specific target by 2050. But what makes me the most excited is the cooperation that I'm seeing from the CCUS core team, the collaboration, the excitement, the willingness to engage and the willingness to provide comments and the willingness to ask questions around CCS. That really makes me excited, and I think that also helps us help the Omani government to look at the best options possible. We're not working in a vacuum. There's lots of engagement, and that really makes me excited that we're going to reach this goal, and we're going to reach it together, and we're going to reach it in the most efficient and effective way possible.
Ali, drawing just close shortly, a company I much admire have done a lot of work in terms of CCS, direct air capture, Oxy. You've recently entered into an MOU with Oxy to accelerate the development of CCS and CCUS for EOR in their production assets in Oman. What can you share about progress on that front?
Yeah, absolutely. We signed the MOU actually at the same time of the launch of the CCUS and blue hydrogen core team announcement. So it's been a few months, and we're very excited to work with Oxy, who are one of the pioneering big producers of oil and gas in Oman. So what we've been doing is we see a requirement from our partners there of CO2. There's a big development happening in terms of assessing the on a pilot level, CO2 requirements to enhance oil recovery, obviously, and the geographical location of the area where the block is. It's close to the Sahara Industrial Zone, relatively close. And big part of it follows an existing pipeline corridor for us, which is a natural gas line. Likewise, since we signed the MOU, we've been having discussion with the Sahara Industrial Port and Free Zone, which has likewise announced a net zero alliance across all the industries and the tenants in the area. So there's a natural fit in terms of how we can deploy sufficient capture technology and aggregate demand of the CO2 in the emitting side, while knowing that there is a potential big utilization sink with our partners of this MOU. So since our MOU, we've been working with them in terms of understanding the timelines, obviously of the pilot requirements for CO2, as well as when decision on a commercial level scale will be done, as well as deciding on the basis of the capacities that is expected, the specs of the CO2 line, the injection pressures. So really, we can say something like a pre-FEED study. There's still very early stages because the timelines are being more defined. And I think just to answer one of the early questions you asked, maybe I didn't get a chance to answer it also. It brings us really forward to some of the challenges we're facing. One part of the challenge is if we're to do a pipeline and we have the capacities required for one user, and knowing that this could be, the pipeline will be there, and to avoid the risk of a stranded asset or just having a continuous looping of these lines, how do we size the pipeline sufficient enough for future users to enable the decarbonization of the industrial zones? That's something we're working with Impact almost concurrently with this MOU announcement on an exercise to get to addresses with most of the industrial players in Oman. So we send out surveys to the major industrial players to ask them of their requirements of CO2 and even their decarbonization plans. And the survey goes in detail about what kind of specs or injection pressures that you expect, and obviously your timelines until 2050 or even beyond. This will help us better conceptualize the line to make sure we aggregate the demand as much as possible. The other challenge we face is also, and that's something that we're very happy to see that's been addressed, is in the absence of regulation, there's not enough incentive or the stick and carrot approach for other industries to decarbonize. But we see a big drive towards that, whether it's internally from the companies and their shareholdership, or because to be part of the net zero goal of Oman. So the study is progressing, and I think by the time the CCS and regulatory framework outcomes will happen, I think by Q4 this year, we should have an update.
Final question from me, and then we'll try and open it up to 3 or 4 from the floor before closing the session. Dr. Firas, pace. How quickly do you want to see the regulatory regimes establish and evolve? I mean, we've talked about adapt, we've talked about new, we've talked about trailblazer, we've talked about fully commercial. So how is that going to evolve in your mind to meet Oman's net zero ambitions? And do you see any long-term targets for CCUS beyond what you're envisaging today?
Thank you, Dr. Martin. I think there are different drivers that push us towards the speed or slowness we go by. One of them is the comprehensive view and policy framework in Oman of how we want to achieve our net zero, which we have clarity for. But then the specific role CCUS will play or CCS will play. So once that is really coined up and tested with the market, it will be one of the drivers. The second is the availability of projects, and which today we have. So we have actually limited the number of projects coming in. And then the third one is the buy-in also from the stakeholders, so both government and then also the general public, which is an element that is still missing. But if I put a number to it, I would say that from our perspective, we are looking at having some set of regulations, at least the preliminary ones that can allow the trailblazer to proceed, definitely be fully in place by the end of this year. So this is something that we need to have in place. And we have our work cut out to ensure that we address all of the gaps that we have currently in our market assessment, the business model that we discussed, looking at liabilities, transfers, and others. And importantly, engagement with the general public to ensure that we have the buy-in, particularly when it comes to elements in the urban or close to the urban centers away from oil and gas, which we have. So that is important. So from our perspective, we have an internal milestone to have something done by the end of this quarter, quarter two, and then the final preliminary framework to raise to the government by the end of this year, inshallah.
I want to ask if anybody else has got any questions now. I'll try and take 3 or 4 before we close. So, thank you. If you raise your hand and let us know where you're from and what your question is. Thank you.
Thank you to the panelists. My name is Mohanad Al-Kalbani. I'm a few other things, but I'm currently a PhD student doing my project on carbon capture, specifically mineralization. I'm just interested in a couple of points. Maybe one question to Dr. Faras is the break-even cost. Break-even cost. What have you received any numbers from your partners on what is a reasonable break-even cost for carbon injection in Oman, given the fact that what Mr. Ali here mentioned about the cost of refurbishing pipelines and stuff, because often this is neglected from the count. And then maybe the second question, to Bernardine, to basically talk about the when it comes to policy making. I guess in Oman we're blessed here with a stable government, so there's no change in government, and things are stable. But in other countries, like for example in Australia, the recent change in government have moved funding from normal carbon injection into aquifers into green cement and green ammonia, for example. Would you suggest something like that to Oman to basically funnel the funding into one direction rather than another?
With regards to the first question, we have received. I mean, the reason we have industry partners within the forum or the CCS framework that we created is actually to get this. So a cornerstone, a deliverable that is required for the different work streams to have a techno-economic assessment. And part of that is getting numbers for example, blue hydrogen and its products. What are the numbers we're looking at? And it's not a theoretical, but it's a tangible project where we know where the sink, the source are, the transport. And that's why we have a cross-industry collaboration among the different parties to come up with these models. When it comes to direct air capture, mineralization, there are numbers that come in. And these, of course, are confidential. They're kept. Some items are elements, for example, when it comes to transport, that is shared. It's going to be a regulatory-based asset kind of approach, so people will know what the tariffs will be for transport, but some elements are confidential, and those are treated in a hub-and-spoke kind of approach where we, as a policymaker, collect that information, synthesize it, and come up with a view, particularly when it comes to subsidies and how these should come in.
So, yes, you are right. You are blessed with a stable government, and there's nothing worse than creating some sort of certainty for investors and for developers, and then the next year you take it away because of a political change in government. Nothing worse than that. But I would also say we need all hands on deck. We need a whole suite of tools to meet net zero. So for me, it's not just about carbon capture. It's about green technologies. It's about decarbonizing the power sector in the most efficient way possible, decarbonizing steel, decarbonizing cement, and other hard-to-abate industries, and CCUS should be complementary to all these tools in the toolbox. I would not suggest a government funnel some money to just one of these technologies or two of these technologies. There should be a considered approach, keeping everything in mind, keeping all the technologies in mind, because there is not just one technology that will bring Oman to net zero. It is a suite of tools.
I'm Subhendu. I'm the director of Global Carbon Council, the standard based out of Qatar for the voluntary carbon market. So my question is, how are you looking at leveraging with the carbon markets for these type of projects? And I understand that CCS is a part of your NDC commitment for 2050, but are you looking at giving authorizations for Article 6.2 for getting finance into these projects from the market? The second part of it is with respect to liability. Obviously, liability is one of the sticking points when it comes to getting carbon market benefits. So there are a lot of services now being offered by insurance companies of buffer as a service. Are you looking at all these as well when it comes to treating liabilities from the host country for transfer of liability beyond the closure period?
All right. So with regards to the second point, the liability question, as I mentioned when Dr. Martin asked, it's something that we're assessing and looking in. Your input on with regards to the insurance companies that provide services, this is well noted, and it's something that we will also consider, inshallah, as we progress with the business model and the regulatory framework. And if you can repeat the first question again, please.
Are you looking at issuing letter of authorization under Article 6.2 for these projects to get finance from international markets, the carbon finance?
Yes, we're looking at that. We're also looking at our own internal green bonds. So this is something that we're working very closely with the Ministry of Finance and in particular Istidama to find the most suitable approaches to finance these projects. And then not just financing them, but creating an incentive scheme to also attract them. So both these elements are being assessed, and this will be coming up as we move forward and mature our policy and announce it, inshallah.
Someone over here has had their hand raised for a
Martin,
question.
if I may.
Oh,
just,
yes, certainly, Mohammed.
Yes, thanks. So, in addition to what's been mentioned by Dr. Firas, also, so clearly, carbon storage basically is one of the key mitigation levers under be it 6.2 or 6.4, basically, and I think the great thing that carbon storage basically has been identified globally as part of the latest COP discussions as one of the key mitigation levers, and of course there is lots of ongoing work around developing the appropriate, developing and approving the appropriate methodology, CDM methodology basically, and transferring this to the new carbon credit system. So clearly it needs to be there, especially if we link it to the need for the monetary incentives for progressing and upscaling these types of projects.
Thank you. Good morning to the panelists. My name is Musa Mabuza from South Africa. And thank you for wonderful insights on the work that Oman is doing and planning going forward. I was wondering, Dr. Firas, if you have considered the use of fiscal instruments as a magnet of behavioral changes for support of CCS as one of the interventions, critical interventions in this regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Musa. And the answer again is yes. I mean, if you have your heart in something, but your pocket is not impacted by it, in our free world, things don't move. So there needs to be a physical regime going forward. And from our perspective, we're just decking them out. So we're looking at what elements that minimize the burden on the government and also makes it sustainable. So we have EUR, which we believe, for example, from our perspective, is self-sustaining and does not require incentives. There are other elements which go beyond what is reasonable in the next 5 years as something that might be more reasonable after a decade. And you have this slew of different projects that come in. And then you assess also the impact they have on the national net zero target and emissions that are associated with them, and you play around with them and find the suitable instruments. So the answer is yes, we're looking into it. And it's a complex scenario, so we just keep on evolving it. And by the end of this year, I think things will be clearer for all parties involved, inshallah.
Thank you very much. Mohammed, could I invite you back to the stage to make some closing comments?
So thank Martin and all the panelists for their contribution and for answering the questions and bringing all that information on what's happening in Oman and how things will be moving forward.